think these jobs are attractive to us where we need to get into an environment where we understand that we're not as good as everybody else, but that gives us something to work towards. And it's a little bit smaller. We're not working towards a career ladder. We're working towards being able to do the things that those guys and gals are doing that we're observing as we don't have that capacity currently.
I think a huge thing for veterans, right? Like we all come out of this very almost structured like crawl, walk, run. And typically there's an education component and typically you're lacking the experience component. And it's the combination of those two things that actually make a skill set that develops into like a level of high performance, right? And for me, I had very little experience in the space. I had a desire to do it. And I started out with like a very baseline training. And I think like anything, right? Like you could come in with this like super great book education, you could have all this schooling. And it really doesn't mean anything when you get to the job. It's all great. And it gives you like a foundation and a base, but it gives you something to grow. But what takes to build on that foundation is the experience of actually doing it.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 112 features Greg Putnam, the president of Little Belt Cattle Company, a veteran-owned and operated working cattle ranch dedicated to raising the highest quality cattle and premium start-to-finish Montana beef, using regenerative ranching practices combined with top Black Angus cattle genetics. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. Good afternoon from the great state of Ohio and good morning in the great state of Montana. Greg Putnam, welcome to Veteran Made.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to chatting with you here this morning.
Yeah, man, me too. I'm stoked. So for those who don't know who you are, if you could give us a brief primer on who you are, where and when you served, and then we'll jump into Little Belt Cattle Company.
Sure, you bet. So I'm Greg Putnam. I'm president, co-founder of Little Belt Cattle Company. Prior to that, I was a Navy SEAL for just about 10 years. I got in late 2007, got out in 2017. At that time, we moved back to Montana and did some stuff kind of in between. And then in 2020, me and business partner started, who was also a former SEAL, started Little Belt Cattle Company.
I love it. So you said moved back to Montana. Have you been a rancher, kind of been on the ranch your entire life, or what got you into it?
No, not at all. So I was born in Pennsylvania, and then I had a cousin who went to school out here, and I started coming out here and just seeing him in summers when I was in college, and just really fell in love with Montana and just kind of everything about it. So when I graduated from college, we moved out here, which was like in the early 2000s, and then we're here for a couple of years before I joined the Navy. And I worked in the outdoor industry for a little bit out here doing that stuff as I was kind of preparing for going to Buds. And my wife and I knew this is where we ultimately wanted to end up one day. We just didn't know exactly when that would be. We kind of went into the military, probably like a lot of people, just seeing where it went, but not really going in with like super set goals on how long we were going to do it. But in 2017 we moved back to Montana.
And so what got you into ranching? What was the entree there? And
it was kind of a very non-traditional, I'd say. I'd say most ranch businesses are traditionally more kind of multi-generational, passed down, and each generation kind of takes over running those ranches and running those businesses. For me, I didn't come from a ranching background, so that wasn't really an option. And honestly, it was kind of um, oh, I don't know. It was just like one of those things that just kind of happened. I had a friend of mine who was also a SEAL, and another buddy who had a family ranch, and he was just going up to help him one day, and they invited me up, and I went up there and just kind of started. I wouldn't say I was much help at that point, but went up there and was experiencing really a large, production agriculture working ranch, for the first time, and definitely since the first time since I joined the Navy, and so it'd been a long time since I'd done anything like that. And for whatever reason, it really just kind of clicked for me. And probably the biggest thing was there was a group of like-minded individuals all working together for kind of a shared goal, which was, at that particular time we were branding calves up there, and similar to the military, it was a group of people that weren't all sitting there looking at their watch, just waiting for work to be done so they could go home. It was a very like task-based operation, extremely skills-based. I remember just being, honestly, just like super impressed with the level of skill of the people who had been doing this for a long time, and also just the lack of skill that I think a lot of people see those sorts of things and go like, oh, that looks easy, or they see it on TV or they see it on movies, and they think it's just something you go out there and do, and they don't realize the amount of skill that actually goes into it. And so that was kind of the introduction, and for whatever reason, it just really planted a seed with me, and was something that just started very gradually with me just going up there more and helping. But every time I went up there, I learned a little bit more. And then eventually I had a GI Bill benefit that I ultimately used to get some education in there. Never, honestly, I never had a goal in mind. I never thought I'd be able to do this full time. It was just something I was super interested in. And for the first time, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to, kind of go to school for something I actually want to do. And it was more for myself. And so I did a program in beef cattle production. And yeah, so that was kind of the introduction to it, but definitely not the traditional start to ranching.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're actually touching on a couple of things that I hadn't anticipated necessarily talking about, but it makes sense now that I think about it. So one, which I'll come back to, is, and you mentioned about the Navy, and then you mentioned about this as well, is not necessarily having a set, rigid plan that you are working towards, which I actually think is a value add that a lot of veterans don't understand. Again, I'll come back to that. But the other thing is this idea of on-the-job training. You and I worked in very different units in the military, but both still in small units, right? You're working in a small unit capacity on the soft side. I'm working on a small unit capacity on the flight line, working on a crew of 3 as we're loading munitions onto and into fighter jets. And on the job, like when I went to my tech school, A school, what they call it in the Navy, like I didn't touch a jet. Like everything was classroom. Everything was kind of understanding safety and getting ready to get on the job to then learn the job on the job. And now, flash forward to both of us working in very different industries. You're in more of like manual labor and ranching, and I'm more in creative services on video and photo production. But again, when I got into this industry, the thing that really got me excited about it was that idea of on the job training. You go to film school, you can go to ad school, and you can build a portfolio. But until you're on the job working with other professionals that have been doing it for a long time while you were doing something else, like you're not really actually going to learn that job. And so I think veterans we tend to be, I think these jobs are attractive to us where we need to get into an environment where we understand that we're not as good as everybody else, but that gives us something to work towards. And it's a little bit smaller. We're not working towards a career ladder. We're working towards being able to do the things that those guys and gals are doing that we're observing, as we don't have that capacity currently.
Yeah. And a couple things there. For me, there were so many parallels between production agriculture and ranching in the military, and I'll talk about what some of those were. But I think a huge thing for veterans, right? Like we all come out of this very almost structured like crawl, walk, run, and typically there's an education component, and typically you're lacking the experience component, and it's the combination of those two things that actually make a skill set that develops into like a level of high performance, right? And for me, I had I had very little experience in the space. I had a desire to do it, and I started out with like a very baseline training. And I think like anything, right? Like you could come in with this like super great book education, you could have all this schooling, and it really doesn't mean anything when you get to the job. It's all great, and it gives you like a foundation and a base, but it doesn't, it gives you something to grow. But what takes to build on that foundation is the experience of actually doing it. And then also people there, like you said, like I remember being in the SEAL teams and being a brand new guy, and you would almost find somebody in your platoon, typically that had been there a lot longer than you, and you'd sometimes you wouldn't even tell them, but you would pick that person and go, I want to be like them. And that would be the person you would bother with. Hey, how do you do this? Like, how do you set your gear up? Hey, can you work through this with me? And if you were somebody that they saw value in themselves, they typically would help you. And for me, getting into ranching and agriculture, I had so many people that helped me, but I also had to be realistic with the fact that I wanted to learn this. I wanted to gain the skill set they had. And I had a very, very, you know, rudimentary understanding. I was at very much that crawl speed, and it took a lot of time, effort, and practice. But it also took a lot of time, effort, and people helping me. But I think there's a component, right? You have to almost get that education component to then build the experience on. And I think a lot of veterans are used to that style of like, right? Like if you're a pilot and you've been flying planes your whole life, or you've shot scoped rifles your whole life, and you show up to the military, you're in day one, week one with the guy who's never even seen a scoped rifle or never even sat in the cockpit of a plane. And we all start from this very, baseline level. And it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter what your experience was. We all started from the same spot. And then it was like, what are you going to do with it? And I do believe that there's like a major education component, but it's not the only level that's going to make you develop into, kind of the professional that you want to become. But you also have to want to do it for the right reasons, right? You have to do it because you want to be really good at whatever that thing is, not because you think it's like other people are going to think it's cool, or, the people that are successful in special operations selection courses want to go do that job. They don't want to go tell people, they don't want to go tell girls at the bar that, oh yeah, I'm this or I'm that. You have to really want to do that job, or you'll never make it through that selection. And I feel like getting into new career fields is pretty similar.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of my favorite things about how our culture has evolved. It's also one of the biggest challenges that we face. I've told this anecdote before, right? Like we all grew up with like our parents, friends, and their colleagues. They worked at one place. They went to college, then they worked at one place their entire career, and then they retired there. Whereas we all have these different options to jump laterally and kind of move our way, ping pong through and build a career ourselves, right? And it's this idea of, it used to be like you either have book smarts or street smarts, right? And to kind of like lowbrow way of looking at it, but really it's like what you're describing is you're integrating those things. I agree with you. I'm not dismissing the need for education, the need for understanding, the need for interest in those things, but you need those to then build those skills and experiences on top of, and you integrate those two things together as you work your way, through whatever your career might be.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing though is the interest, right? That for me, getting to ranching and production agriculture was the interest. That was the only driving factor in the beginning, with no actual goal. And I think so many veterans, we all come out of these organizations, right? For me, joining the SEAL teams, it's not just like the day you go to BUD/S to the day you get out of the military. There's years of thought and preparation that goes into that. And then you're finally doing it, right? And you're doing it for real. And then you get out and you go, well, what am I going to do next? And finding that next thing. And I think a lot of people, almost have this unrealistic expectation that they're going to find that next perfect thing right out of the gate, where that transition is a process. But I think what helps get you closer to what you want to do is when you're actually honest with yourself and pursue the things you're truly interested in. But like, I totally agree with you. I've had people say to me before, like in a negative way, like, well, you've done this and then you did that and now you're doing this. Like there's no flow to your career chart. Like, aren't you worried about the fact that like you're making these changes? And I'm like, no, not really, because I've always pursued the career paths like that I have like deep interest in. And I'm a firm believer that you're never going to be great at something that you don't truly love doing. And you could be all right at it. And the only time I've ever been like dissatisfied in my career field is when I didn't truly go after something that meant a lot to me from an interest perspective. But I think for veterans, it's like, it's such a tough time when you make that transition, and there's so many people giving you what I feel like it just isn't like great advice. Like when I got out, it was like, you have to go into tech or finance. I'm like, I don't want to do either of those things. I didn't even know that this was even an option. And part of us, trying to do these podcasts and do different things is to put out like, hey, there's a number of other industries that may be really beneficial to veterans looking at it, and similar to what you're doing, where you just don't know even what's available to you. But I think what leads you to finding out what that next step is really truly following the things that you're actually interested in.
Yeah, I think that's right. We are obsessed with finding the why, right? Like, why do you do what you want to do? When in reality, we need to go find the what that we love doing. What do I want to spend all of my time doing, right? You spend 80% of your life working. I mean, people can disagree with that and say that's good or bad, work-life balance, all those conversations. Those are for other folks. I'm not interested in that conversation because we work 80% of our lives. So I want to be doing the what that I love doing every single day. And so what guides me is to put myself in a position to do that what, and then the why will come along with it, and the passion will come along with it. Like Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs has said this for years, right? Like, don't go do what you're passionate about. Go do something you're good at and bring your passion with you. And I think what you're describing as interest is not so much passion, so much as it is like that what that you want to do. And then you'll find yourself being passionate as you bring that energy along with you.
Yeah, and that'll drive forward, right? It's like, I think one of the biggest mistakes personally you can make, and maybe there's a lot of people that would disagree with this statement, but if I go, my only what is I have to make a lot of money. Well, okay, that's great, right? But I think that like when you start doing the things that actually matter to you, and you start doing the things and you bring like I think you're right. There's a lot of this like, do your passion, and it's like, okay, maybe, or you just find the thing you're super interested in and bring passion, and people can tell. You can't fake that, right? Like you can't fake the level of commitment you have. You can't fake authenticity. You either are or you're not. And when you're interested in something, it's easy to be that thing, right? But then success starts to kind of follow, like chase after you, and you're not so much chasing after it, because it's easy to go to that job. It's easy to go and take that entry level position. It's easy to have those hard days when you're getting better and you're moving towards something that that is getting you closer to like where you actually want to be. Like it's easy to go through buds when you want to be a SEAL and actually go do that job. And every day you get closer to that, it makes that process easy. And again, people out there I tell people all the time, it's not, it's what you do, but it's also who you are and what you bring to it. And that's a huge component to any of these things. It doesn't matter what it is, but you got to be into something that you're into.
Yeah, I think that's right. And back to that first point that you were talking about, that the rigidity, right? Like, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, both in the Navy and as you've transitioned out. Like I made this mistake early, and thankfully I corrected it relatively early as well. But I had a plan to go to film school, to be a writer, to be a director, to work in films in Hollywood and go do that thing. Where what ended up happening was I became obsessed with what I was doing, and I found opportunities to go get on set doing branded content and branded entertainment. And then that took me into commercial advertising. And then now that's primarily what I do. And I'm extremely fulfilled doing it because I get to do the what every single day. I was talking with a friend last week. We were on set and we were talking about, we were producing a 30-second TV commercial. And we basically went through an abbreviated process of a feature film in like 3 weeks to get the thing concepted, pre-production, produced, edited, out the door. And so I just get to do that so much more. Not that I'm not interested in film, not that I'm not going to try to pursue those things kind of where and when I can, but I saw these opportunities to go do that what that I wanted to do, to get on set and make shit. and I took those opportunities. And I'm very grateful that I was able to kind of see that. Not this articulately back then, right? Like back then it was like, oh, I'm going to kind of go do this and try it and tinker and move forward. Now I can look back and say, oh, that was a really good thing that I made. I had some wisdom I didn't kind of realize I had. So for you, and I think it's really smart. Like as you were thinking about your time in the Navy and as you were thinking about transitioning out, what benefits have you noticed about not having a rigid plan, but working your way through what's in front of you?
Yeah, a couple of things. So like to what you were just saying, right? You almost have to say like to put it back into your world a little bit, right? Like there's different type of ordnance. So you have more of these, let's just call them World War II style blanket bombings to today you have these super precision guided missiles. I think you have to go into a space you're interested in, and then you start dropping the blanket bombs, and all of a sudden they start hitting, and then as they start hitting, you start to find within that area like, ooh, this door is open. Oh, I really like this, right? And all of a sudden you start closing that into this precision. This is what I really like. This is what I want to be doing. This is where, and that changes, right? Um, Tying it back now to like my world, one of the biggest lessons I learned in the military and doing special operations is you have to have a plan to start with, right? But you can't be so rigidly connected to that plan that it takes away your ability to realize when the plan isn't working. The number one thing that I think is if you have a good plan, then you can tell when that momentum starts to change. And when it's changing not in your favor, the ability to make decisions to correct that and not just keep going with it because that's what the plan was. And for me now, I mean, I tell people this all the time. We make these plans with our crew, and the same way that the enemy gets a say, environment gets a say, well, we deal with live animals and they get a say. And if everybody understands this is the plan, this is the goal, here are some contingencies that we'll kind of work to, they can make decisions on the fly to correct course if things aren't going our way. And they don't go our way a lot of the time. But something that I've instilled in our crew and something I think I'm actually pretty good at is feeling when that starts to happen and making a decision that still gets us to what a win looks like, but maybe corrects course as we go, and not being so rigid within that plan to where we don't have the ability to make the changes that we need to adjust to what's being put in front of us. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I had from the military, that I've just that's kind of where I grew up, I'd say, professionally. So for me, it's easy to make those course corrections, and make them fairly quickly, I guess, rather than just keep on the wrong path, But that's what we planned. That's what we planned. And I think you just have to be able to when you start to realize that's, the tide is kind of turning against you. You gotta be able to make those corrections. And we do it all the time. Hey, the cattle don't want to go through this gate. Cool. Let's take them the direction they want to go. And then we'll take them through this gate and we'll go through that gate. And then we end up where we wanted to be anyway. Why fight them when we can kind of use the momentum? And that's something you start to learn in livestock, in cattle movements, et cetera, is use the momentum to your favor, right? Don't force them through something, especially if you're in small teams, where if they're going south and you can get them through this gate, but then ultimately you can get them where the target is. Use it in your favor.
That's right. The whole point of mission planning is to accomplish a mission, right? So the plan is a means to that end. So as long as you're able to successfully and safely accomplish that mission, if the plan needs to adjust along the way, that's totally fine, because you're still where you needed to end up at the end of that process. So you're drinking water from a fire hose, learning kind of on the job, getting exposure. You go and get yourself some education. At that point, was the education and a means forward into a career in this field? Like what was your mindset like as you were working, educating yourself? What were you moving towards?
No, to be perfectly honest, it was to fill a gap that I guess I was kind of feeling in my current professional life, where I almost needed a challenge. I needed to be learning something new. I needed that feeling of being terrible and not knowing anything. And I still at that point when I went and did that program, I had no um, expectation that I never thought there was going to be an opportunity for me to do this full time, to be perfectly honest. And I was only doing it because I really truly wanted to get better. And every time I went up to, help at friends' places, I wanted to show up and I wanted to be seen as somebody that was more capable and had a better understanding. And the more I learned about the industry, the more I was just kind of fascinated by it. And even at that time, I had no plan other than I wanted to learn more about it. And I was fascinated by all of it. And I did start to see though that the more kind of that education that I got, the more I realized what was happening kind of on the experience and the operational side, and started to get just a better understanding of what um, those different, kind of places were doing and why. And so it all started kind of just to come together quicker. So I think if I had only done one or the other, I don't think I would have gotten as far as I did as quickly as I ultimately did. But still at the time when I did that program, I had no unrealistic expectation that somehow, this was going to become a job. It was just something I wanted to learn more about. And it was something my brain kind of needed to fill the void of challenge that I wasn't getting at the time in the job that I was doing.
Do you think that that mindset helped you succeed during that period of time?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was just, again, I think like, you have to have like a level of obsession in what you're doing to take it on quickly. Um, and that's where the interest, and then again, all those things just kind of came together, and it started to build positive momentum in a different direction without me kind of trying to force it. And ultimately, when the door did open, then for me to be able to do this, I was prepared, and I'd had enough things not go my way. I'd learned enough lessons in the preparation of learning. I had done that program. And so when I actually had the opportunity and like that door opened, I was able to walk through it. If I had done nothing, you know, if I hadn't done those things, and they were hard to do. I mean, I had a full-time job. I had a family and have a family, and it was a lot of extra time for no real goal, no real like, oh, where's this going, right? But then ultimately, when the opportunity came about, I was able to actually say like, hey, yeah, I could do this because I'd had enough um, experience. I kind of feel like, I don't know how it was in your um, career field in the military, but in the SEAL teams, you kind of go, you're a brand new guy, and then you do your first platoon, and kind of the adage is, you're just dangerous enough to get yourself in a lot of trouble. You could do a really great job, but you also could just get, you just don't have the experience. And then you get through your second platoon, and now you get more experience, you get more capable, and that just builds and grows. And I felt like I was kind of just at that point where I had enough experience to either, get us into a lot of trouble or get us into the right direction. And but if I hadn't done all those things, that wouldn't have even been an option for me to look at.
Yeah, it is remarkably similar. I mean, the first crew that I was on, yeah, I was in that exact same position, right? Where like I showed some aptitude and showed some talent and showed some interest in what we were doing. And I was really good at a lot of things very quickly, which was great. But then I was pretty poor at a handful of things. And luckily I had great mentors at my unit. And so when I got placed onto my second crew, I was kind of really able to lead from behind, right? I was still just E3, E4. I only did 4 years, right? So I didn't do a second station or anything like that. But I was still put in a position to be able to help my one man and my two man. I was a three man on the crew. Those guys one guy came from B-52s, another guy came from F-16s, but I had all this institutional knowledge on the F-15, on the E model. And I already deployed once. I'd been TY multiple times all around Europe doing NATO stuff. And so I was able to really fully understand exactly what it was that you just said. And so for me, because I jumped out of like you, I jumped out of the military and jumped into something completely different. I didn't bring those specific skills with me but I did bring those life skills and those experiences that came along with those lessons learned, and was able to take them and displace them onto this new environment that I was in. And I think that's something that goes, it's probably something we all intuit and understand, but it is a little bit difficult to step back for a second, press pause, kind of expand your focus frame and look at, all right, what are the hard skills that I had in the military that are applicable and aren't applicable? What are the life skills that I had in the military that are applicable, and how do I maneuver those things into place? I just got a note. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you now, but you did cut out for like probably 15 seconds.
Okay. Volume 2?
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting, hold on one second. Let me,
Yep.
hold on. I think we should be good now.
That looks a lot better now. Like
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it looks clearer and it was like a little bit delayed on the video. It looks better now.
Okay. Yeah. I should be fine for the full episode, but like we were talking about when I started, I might have to go in and sync
Cool.
them up a bit here, but all good. But yeah, no, just to reiterate, to come back, like, I think that trajectory that we go through in the military, you and I both did it, not as careers, but in an abbreviated fashion, you longer than me, but you still kind of go through that. All right, I'm here. I know some things. I don't know some things. I'm good at some things. I'm not good at some things. Then you move on to that second crew, that second platoon, and you're like, all right, now I can start to put some of those things into place. And then that third iteration of, all right, well, now I'm out of the military. How can I do that same thing again? Going to be a little bit more difficult now, because the hard skills don't necessarily apply. It's those life skills that we need to kind of take and displace onto our new environment. So you mentioned
real quick, I think there's like this, it's interesting, right? Because a lot of people go, well, I've got all these military skills, what am I going to do when I get out to apply those? And they think the hard skill for you, like, what are you going to do? What civilian company are you going to go work with and put bombs on airplanes?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's some contracting opportunities, much like your job. That's it. There's
correct.
That's
but
it.
If you take hard SEAL skills and you go like, well, how many opportunities are there out there to apply those same, close quarters combat? Well, zero, really. I mean, there's only, I mean, outside contracting, right? Or other military style work. But the lessons that you learn and the application of those lessons into whatever that next step is for you is something that I don't think veterans realize how applicable that soft skill set is, of like those things, and that you might not be the most experienced guy in that space, but like you might have more management experience in higher stress situations, right? You might be able to come into a boardroom and say like, or a team of people and say like, all right, guys, hey, like, no worries here. Like, what are we going to do? Like, where's the actual problem? How are we going to fix it? Where I've noticed that a lot with people that just haven't had the same level of kind of like stress in their jobs. And so I think there's this huge amount of value that gets brought in, and it doesn't have to be this exact hard skill set. You just have to realize you start to develop ways of going like, okay, how do I apply this? Like for us at the ranch, like we are big on, like almost like a pre-mission briefing, right? If we're going to go do this thing, if my manager out there is going like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is this is where we're going, this is the goal, this is what the left and rights look like, I want him to do that every single time, so people know. That's a very military based skill, right? We do a post production day briefing of what went well, what could have went better, what's something you learned. Very military in style, right? The way that we communicate with each other is very much what I learned in the SEAL teams, right? Where there's a number of things, right? Like if you're communicating with other people, even in high stress situations, the way you respond and the way that you communicate with your team is either going to make it worse or it's going to make it better. So if something's happening and I come over and I start yelling and screaming at somebody, does that make it better or does it make it worse? Am I adding to the stress or am I like mitigating it, right? And just like in the military where like calm is contagious, that's 100% true in really in everything. And we've taken a lot of those soft skills and applied them into our business. And it's amazing how many people have worked at different types of jobs, different for us, different ranches, different places, really like that, that structure and like being able to, and it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to pass lessons on to people and go like, hey, nobody really saw this happen, but I was doing this and this happened and it didn't go the way I wanted it to, and I pass it on so that you don't make the same mistake. And I think a lot of those skill sets, there's so much, they apply so well into whatever your next thing is. And I think a lot of people don't realize how, just how powerful those skills are and what sort of asset you can be to a team or another company by bringing those in. Even if you don't have the hard experience in that exact space, you still have a lot of value to bring.
Yeah, and I think our ability to communicate and lead up and down a chain of command, or again, like back to small unit analogy, right? Like on your teams, you've got breacher, comms guy, sniper, you've got all these different things. So if you're not one of those guys, you trust that guy is going to do his job as well as he can. You communicate to him what he needs to know. Same thing on the flight line, right? Like working on a three-man load crew, but we're also working with avionics troops out there, crew chiefs out there, engines troops out there. When military veterans transition into the civilian space, I think one big misconception is that we're very good at just following orders and that we're very good at, or not very good, but that we can just kind of do one thing and hard charge it. When in reality, what we can do is we can step back and say, all right, here's where my competency fits in. How can I support everybody else that's around me with their competencies to help move the project forward, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And it's so many little things, right? It's like, always find a job. These are things I tell people still all the time. I'm like, hey, like if you don't have a job, find one. Don't wait for somebody to tell you what to do. There's something you can be doing that brings value, right? Like don't ever be too high of rank to not take out the trash, right? There's always something that you can do to add value to whatever it is that you're doing. And those are little things that we all know from that military background that make a big difference regardless of what you do after that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you mentioned the door opening. What was the door? When did it open? How did it open for you? And how'd you walk through it?
Sure. So I've been doing all this stuff just kind of somebody once, just a friend of mine that I know, he says basically we all have a 9 to 5 and then we should all have a 5 to 9, right? What's the project that you're working on that maybe isn't your full-time gig? And this really had been my 5 to 9. And in late 2019, a good friend of mine and business partner had sold a business in the tech and defense space. And we were just talking one day about, what he was going to do next, what I was going to do next. And we were talking about, this cattle thing. And, he said, hey, this is something I've been super interested in, something him and I had actually talked a lot about previously and just never again thought it was going to be, something that we were going to have the ability to do. And when he sold that company, all of a sudden, we did have, and he had the opportunity to explore some new things. So I had probably enough experience and desire to do it. And he had desire to do it as well. So we said, hey, let's look at what this thing would take to do a startup ranch in, this was late 2019 and we actually officially started the ranch in 2020. And, but again, the opportunity arose. I had the experience, I had the education, and I also had the trust of my business partners to go in there and get this thing started. And that didn't just come from doing it in this space. It came from doing it in, in other areas. But they believed in me to come in and I believed in myself ultimately, that I could do it as well. And so when that door and that opportunity arose and they said, hey, let's partner this thing, it was easy for me to say like, oh yeah, let's get it going. And then, within that too, I had I had networked well. I had some really good mentors. I had some good partners that, really helped us get going and get started. And I think the combination of all those things, when that door opened, I could confidently go, yeah, I can go through that door for sure.
What was the vision initially to can you paint the picture for the context for the environment, the state of Montana, the state of cattle ranching in the country? What was the vision, and why did you two think that this was the right place, right time to start this particular business?
Yeah, great question. I will tell you, to be perfectly honest, there wasn't like this super long term, like, oh, this is exactly what we're gonna do. There was like a desire, and I think we were looking at. There's a lot I know now. I could give you a very, very like educated answer right now, and I could make this sound like we had this, wherewithal and this vision and of the state of ranching, all things that we learned as we actually started going that helped us. And our timing was very good, but not because we were like, oh, look at this market right now, we'll time this thing perfectly. Our timing was good because we just got lucky ultimately when we came into it. Our initial goal was to start a very, traditional production agriculture business. We we wanted to put more acres into agriculture. We were seeing a trend that a lot of these ranches, if they weren't being passed down to multi generations, like management, were going into either recreation or other things were buying them up, and they were going out of agriculture and into either recreation, but something that was taking out of the food production system that we all rely on here in this country. And so that was a driving factor. And but our initial vision was, let's get a cow calf operation, which would be a pretty standard Montana ranching operation, which I can go into more detail on if you want to talk more about it. But we just wanted to get it off the ground. And to be honest, I mean, my initial goal was, when the cows first arrived and got off the truck, and that truck drove away, our initial goal was just the quality and care of those animals. And that still is a very much a driving theme of our business. I mean, the quality and care of the livestock that we own, run, manage is primary to our overall business. And that has been since day one. But really our goals were, I mean, they were pretty like 5-meter targets. Do the right thing for these animals. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. There was a feeling of like, I just hope I do have the skill set to not kill all of these things, because they're live and you can screw it up really bad. And but I think the fear of screwing up really bad drove me to try to do every little thing right. And I think those little incremental things that we did right in the beginning kind of led us to where we are today. And I can give you the 30-second elevator speech on where we are today, and then we can kind of dissect into that, or we can just keep visiting.
Yeah, I mean, talk to me about what I mean. So I'm fairly ignorant, right? Like
Yeah.
I eat meat. My family eats meat. I know meat is good for us. I know there's a lot of folks out there saying that it's not. I mean, I take organ meat, supplements, because I can't get all, or don't get all of it rather, and cook it myself. So I'm one of these consumers who's interested in eating clean, eating healthy, eating things that are good for me, and feeding my family in that way. And my wife and I are constantly looking at ingredients. And we were just talking last night about what fast food was like when we were kids, what the ingredients were versus what the fast food is like for our kids now. And it's not like it was good for us back then, but it was quite a bit less ingredients and technically better for us than it is for our kids now. So I'm ignorant to the inner workings of it, but I'm an interested consumer and wants to understand these things. So yeah, what is a cattle calf ranch? Like, let's start at the beginning. Like, what specifically were you trying to build? Who were your customers? Like, and what did that operation look like, or what did you kind of immediately want it to look like?
Yeah, it's a perfect intro because you are our customer, right? What you just explained is the customer that we target. And so I'll give you the 30-second, and then I'll go into it. So Little Belt Cattle Company is a premium beef company that has built a vertically integrated supply chain of 100% Montana beef. So what that means is we truly do start to finish all the way through. The beef and cattle business is a very phase line business, and I'll talk about what that means. But we literally do from genetics all the way through steaks hitting people's plates, right? And so now we work with a number of restaurant partners here locally. We do direct to consumer nationwide, online, and we've got a number of like contract sales avenues on the beef side, but we also sell a lot of live cattle as well. So the phase lines that get steak, onto your plate, short version basically looks like this. You have what's called cow-calf producers. So those are operations that own cows, female cattle, right? So there's a lot of terms that people kind of mess up within. Cows don't apply to all cattle, right? A cow is a female that has had at least one calf. And so your cow-calf operations would own cows, and those are the factory. Every year, those cows produce calves that rancher raises up to basically a certain age/size. And then typically in the fall in Montana, those calves get sold, and especially on the male side. So typically, like, I'll just make the numbers up, but let's say you had 500 cows. You would have a certain amount of assumed, not 100% of those are going to produce a calf every year, but let's just say they all did because you're such a great rancher. So you'd have 250 steers, or if they're going into beef, they'd be bull calves that get castrated and become steers. And then 50% of them, 250, would be females that would go back into your reproduction to keep your steady 500. So as you lose cows every year, you replace them with females. And then those females either, the leftovers either get sold, or that's how you would build your herd organically over time. But let's just talk about the male side into beef. Those steers would get sold to somebody else into what would be called like a grow yard typically, and they would grow them to a certain point, and that would become like a yearling or a feeder or those are the typical names that next phase line would be. And then they would grow them to maybe 800 pounds. And then a finishing yard, or a finishing operation would then buy those, and they would take them up to 1,400 pounds. Then they would be sold as what would be called fat cattle. And, one of your large like packing houses, like you hear about JBS, Tyson, when you hear the big four, that's what they're referring to. So a Tyson buyer might buy those fat cattle. They go to a processing plant, they get slaughtered, processed, and distributed nationwide. Typically that happens in different regions of the country, and those different phase lines in those changes of hand is also changes of ownership. So there's not a lot of quality assurance from start to finish. And then people do just, there's a lot of beef companies out there that'll buy yearling cattle at a certain size, and they'll run them from this size to this size, and then they'll put them in their own beef company. That's not a start to finish, right? Somebody else is starting it, they're doing a portion of it, and then they're taking it to another portion, which is all great. Like it's still a localized, more regional process, but for ours, we literally select the genetics and buy genetics from seed stock producers here in Montana. We produce those calves, we retain ownership of those calves, we grow those calves on grass at the ranch as yearlings. They go to our feed yard where we finish them, and then we go to a processing plant where they get processed, and we do our own distribution of those. So we literally provide quality assurance from start to finish in a way that very, very few other operations, especially at kind of the size that we're at, are able to do. And that's what our business has become. Where we started was as a cow-calf operation. And then we did that for a bit. And then we slowly started to retain ownership of those calves. And, we really built a really good cow-calf operation first. And then we started retaining those yearlings. Then we partnered on the feed yard and started finishing cattle for other programs. Then we slowly rolled. So I think a lot of people could easily look at where we are today and say like, oh wow, that like you almost rushed into it. We're very, not because it was part of our plan, but just for how it worked out. We strategically made steps to the next level as we were sound at the level below it, right? And and as we put more and more cattle into that system, and what people don't realize about livestock and cattle production, it's extremely capital intensive. When you're putting feed into those cattle, every single day, and that that changes throughout the year. So if they're on grass at the ranch, it costs me very different than if they're on the feed yard eating a finished ration to become a fat. Um, the 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 cash flow and the capital intensity in the timing of cash coming back into the system is critical, and it's something that's really hard when you get out of that phase line, because typically like a cow calf operation would sell their calves in the fall. All the money that they have basically to run on for the year would come in at that time, so it goes back to the beginning and then very strategically gets used over the next 12 months. For us, because we retain ownership of those cattle, it pushes that same dollar in the basically the ROI on that dollar out, what could be 2+ years before that dollar comes back into the system. So you've got to be extremely strategic. And so as we made those next jumps to the next level, we had to be like extremely strategic about how we were going to do that, even from a cash flow perspective. But then it's a different skill set on the livestock side. So your cow calf operators have a very, similar but different skill set than your yearling guys. And then your feed yard guys have a different skill set than both of those guys. And so on. And beef distribution is a completely different skill set. So all of those things combined together to be to where we are today. We're not where they were, day one.
Yeah, and back to what we started with, right? Like start where you are, build competency there, and then you can stack, right? And then you can continue to vertically integrate. And you have to work within that system, right? That's in place. I mean, this can get like very ideological, very, very quickly for a lot of people, right? Like we look at mass production and industrial farming and all these things, and people want to be consumers and customers of yours and others because they don't want to contribute to that system. But it sounds to me like you were starting where you were and working within that system in order to vertically integrate yourself so that you can become that self-sustaining business that consumers want to support.
And the vertical integration started to really happen. So this is something I think both Tim and I are good at, right? And kind of back to just like feeling the flow, if you will, of like what's happening around you, right? So we start this business in 2020. COVID comes in. All of a sudden now, Americans across the country go to the grocery store and there's not beef on the shelf. And in our communities here in Montana, we were seeing the same effects, right? And luckily here you have more access to, local food, local ranches, hunting, etc. But not everybody has access to that. And so we kind of recognized this gap of like, oh, why is this happening? And the more we looked into it, the more we realized that this phase lined approach within beef maybe didn't have this like the same level of security that this local raise start to finish. And so our initial goal in beef production was to put Montana beef back into Montana communities. And when we were successful doing that, then we took it to, all right, how do we now make Montana beef nationwide? And the biggest thing for us is we want people to know who and where their beef comes from. I say this probably on every podcast that I'm on, is a prerequisite for liking our product, supporting our product, liking our company is not that you have to dislike everybody else. If you're buying local, you're supporting other ranches, you're supporting good producers, you're supporting American producers, well, you're helping, and it's up to consumers to truly vote with their dollars. What a lot of people don't realize is the amount of imported beef that comes into this country is massive. And you look at some of these massive online retailers, and 90% of their beef comes from outside the country. It's never been easier to support American producers. It's never been easier to buy local. you buying Little Belt Cattle Company in Ohio and getting it shipped to you is you buying locally from me, right? Me going to a farmer's market and people buying locally there supports our local business, restaurants, um, chefs. It's a supply chain that is reliant on the end consumer to be there. I could have the best cattle you've ever seen. I could have the best steaks you've ever seen. I could have them all sitting in the freezer. And if I don't have an end customer, I can't keep the supply chain going, right? And we realized during COVID that maybe there was more to this whole beef production side when we started to see the cracks in that food production system. And that really drove us to this vertical integration. We'd always talked about the more vertically integrated, the more you can take, small margins incrementally along the way as a business. And collectively, those small margins add up to higher profitability was something we had thought about and something we had learned from other businesses we've been involved in, but we didn't really see that until we saw what was happening during COVID. And that kind of drove us to the next thing. I thought at that point we were just going to be a livestock producer. And our goal was always to produce the highest quality livestock for other national programs. And we were doing that. And that's how we got started. And we knew that the quality of the cattle we were producing and the level we were playing at, then it opened up. How do you market that? How do you start distributing that? How do you take on that next phase yourself? And we did that small and incremental, and we've slowly put more and more of our home raised cattle into our own branded beef program with a goal of getting 100% of those cattle into our own program, which will happen here, in 2025.
So how did you build and map those relationships as you recognize those opportunities? What steps did you take tactically to build those relationships?
Well, number one, we pre-built them before we had the product, right? So I'll take our marketing, for example. When we started working towards, we knew this beef deal was going to be a longer play, right? Just for how long it takes to raise those animals. So in the meantime, what we did was we started marketing that product prior to having it so that we weren't trying to develop a sales pipeline and a customer base when that product was sitting in the freezer. We started to develop that 24 months out. And which is a little weird, right? Because you have to have customers then that are like, well, you don't have the product yet. And you're like, no, we're working on it, but we want you to be there when we do. So what do we do in the meantime? Well, we really focused on our marketing to build that. We started to do things where we had things that they could support us. We had merchandise, we had hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts, coffee cups. And people didn't realize, like, by buying that, it helped us get down the road to where we were going with our like true end product. But the last thing we wanted was to be, quote unquote, selling that product. My goal was to be allocating that product into different areas. And so we started just building those relationships. That was in the beginning, we had customers that we physically couldn't get product to because we didn't have national distribution. And I used to tell people, unfortunately, you got to come to Montana. In the very beginning, we were so 100% Montana that you could only consume our product in Montana with our partners that gave us a chance, right, to prove ourselves. And a lot of those customers and a lot of those original relationships with restaurants and markets and different outlets are still some of our best relationships. And the key was, though, we had to build this customer base. We had to get people to connect with us and our story. And we focused a lot on that. And marketing in a direct-to-consumer beef business is very much a thing. In a livestock cattle business is not really a thing, right? And it's almost looked at similar, like, like writing a book or doing different things in the military that people, almost they frown upon a little bit. It's like it's just not part of that industry, really. And there's not really a need for it, because if you don't have the ability to buy live cattle from me, why do I need an Instagram page to try to sell live cattle to somebody? Then it just seems more of like well, look at me, right? But if you have a direct-to-consumer product, you have to have the ability to market to those people. And the other thing we wanted to do, back to what we were talking about with you being a customer of ours, the majority of our customers look and sound like you, like, hey, I'm super into this. I'm super fit. I have an active lifestyle. I want to feed myself and my family really high quality food. Um, if you've ever worked with a nutritionist or strength and conditioning coach, they tell you like avoid highly processed foods, right? Your diet is 50% of your overall performance. Well, we come from those same backgrounds, right? So we wanted to put that high quality protein back into our community and back into our country ultimately at the end of the day. Um, but how we got there was where we ended up was not the initial goal. We just built, grew, and scale into where we saw areas that we thought we could solve a problem, which the problem we ultimately solved was who and where does your food come from and how did it get to you? And we feel like we provide probably the highest level of quality assurance that our customers can count on. When they buy our product, they know exactly where that product came from and how it was cared for to get there, and they know what they're getting. If you go and buy a steak off the grocery store shelf, you do not have that same connection to that product.
So now that you have those relationships built and mapped, and you are where you are, what are you now working towards? And I guess a secondary question is, are you still taking the approach of let's just do what's right in front of us, see what opens up, and see how we can work this process, or have you started to lengthen and maybe forecast some of your goals organizationally?
Absolutely, great question. I think as we started out and we weren't exactly sure where we were going, I think we now very much have a very clear path of where we want to go. And a lot of that has been through that process of just, again, kind of not knowing the business going into it, has actually turned out to be a benefit because we've probably done things that I don't know if we would do them again, knowing what we know now, but the not knowing actually, we were like, oh yeah, we could do that. And then we started to realize what it actually took to do it. Now we have a very clear path of what we're trying to do in where we're trying to go with this company, especially on the branded beef side. Number one, we want people to know who and where their beef comes from, and we want to give them, a real look at what that looks like, almost to create a higher level of connection to the food that they're ultimately eating and the beef that they're eating. We also now are trying to really dial in, I'm just going to call like our efficiencies in scale. And we are building and growing within our company to where everything we're doing, we're trying to maximize our efficiencies. We're trying to get better. Now it's all these like little things that again, incrementally add up to higher profitability. And that could be filling semis fully versus, having it 2/3 full. That's working with processors that, we get a higher level of detail and care because we're running more cattle through on a more regular schedule. So our goals for 2025, I'd say, are to truly dial in our system and not really try to find like different opportunities that may help push more volume into our overall program, but it's to do what we're doing with the customers we currently have to the best possible, our best possible ability, and do that really well over a 12-month period. Really analyze the stuff that's working well and continue to put energy into that, and try to minimize or correct the things that aren't working so well. And all of that is to have a very systematic approach that produces quality and consistency of the beef that we're putting out over a 12-month period. The hardest thing small beef companies have and is the ability to keep consistency to where when you go on and order, the product's always there. A lot of these companies, what happens is they've got product and then they run out and they don't have it for 6 months or 8 months or whatever the case may be. We are extremely consistent, but not only with having product to sell to our customers, but also in that the product they receive, the quality is also there. Very much like producing, this is our mindset and our goal. The same way that, and I'll just talk about special operations because it's what I came out of. The same way that when they want to increase the quantity of special operators within the United States, if you do that incorrectly, the quality will slide and you will not get the same level of operator. And they've seen that over and over again. I could talk about 50 examples. I won't bore you with all of them, but we don't want to increase in quantity with a hit on quality. And a lot of companies do that. They go, oh, I got this big contract. I'll rush the cattle through. I'll buy more outside cattle. I have no idea where they came from, but I'll tell people they're the same, even though they're not. And we will not do that. And so now what we are trying to do is dial in our system. And we're at a size and a scale that maximizing those efficiencies. The weird part where we're at now is you can't just jump in these small increments. You can't go, all right, you're killing this many a month or a year. Let's do a couple more and a couple more. We now have to jump by semi-load trucks. So it almost goes from, you go from 1 truck to 2 trucks to 3 trucks. So your jumps have to be really well thought out. And we're getting much, much better now at knowing where we want to go. And we're mapping out how we're going to get there. But we're doing that as smart as we can as a business to make sure that, right now it's a great problem to have, but our demand is outpacing our supply because of all those things I just talked about. What we're trying to do now is say, okay, this is the demand we know we can hit at the level we want to hit it, which is very high. We do USDA graded choice and prime beef, like high level white table restaurant quality beef. That is hard to do. To do that and meet the customer demand every single time is what we're really focused on now. And it's really dialing in our system so that it truly becomes a repeat. That's the biggest thing, right? When you have a system, that's repeatable. When you just do a bunch of different things, it's hard to know where you're doing well and where you're doing poorly. And it's a hard thing because it's like getting everybody more dialed in. And all of it ultimately then comes down to your accounting and your finances and your cash flow to be able to operate as a business, as efficiently as possible. And, we do it with a really small team. We all work super hard. I mean, we are a startup in an industry with very, very few startups. And it's a hard business to get into. There's a number of barriers of entry. Probably more people told Tim and I that that you can't do it going into ranching as they did. People love to tell you that when you tell them you want to be a SEAL as well. More people probably try to deter us from doing this just because of the high level of barrier of entry from skill and the economics of it. And just the getting into it. I mean, it's just a tough business because it's a low margin, high volume game, but it's a game that there's very little room for error in sliding on your quality more than anything else. And there's so many companies out there you can look at or you can order from and see if their product quality stays the same order after order after order. And that's something I'm pretty obsessed with.
What drives you to resist that temptation? And it's true across different industries, right? Like if you start to see some success and you start to grow, both in capability and competency as well as in size and scale, those temptations to execute and operate your business
Excuse me.
way are very high. Like that's true across a bunch of different industries, and it's both this personal thing and this professional thing. What drives you to resist that temptation?
Oh, so to resist the temptation of, sorry, say that one more time.
So you were using the example, right, of like you've gotten where your demand is outpacing your supply, and of other businesses of your size and scale that
Mm-hmm.
have, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but unethical practices, right? To say like, we'll buy these cattle, we'll say they're the same and they're not, so that we can keep up with our supply, increase our demand, like manufacture demand, right? Rather than actually organically grow that demand. I latched onto that when you were saying it. It's like, what drives you to resist the temptation to do that?
Copy. Okay. Yeah. So what drives us honestly is that I guess I refuse to have any any slides in quality. This business is hard enough to keep your quality at a consistent level. I mean, you can have the temperature of a refrigerator or a freezer, the length and amount of time that ground beef goes through the processing thing to come a patty. There's all these things that they're kind of out of your control that can affect your quality. And rushing, I guess what I would tie it all back to is, again, like a lesson learned from the military is, if you're doing targets assaults, right? And I learned this lesson from somebody who did thousands of these in way more than most people I know. But his whole thing was, why rush in to a situation that you're going to potentially get killed, right? Why not slow it down, take your time, and go into that situation where you know you can win, and do that in a way, in a pace that stacks the cards in your favor, right? There's people out there that do in the beef industry are extremely unethical. There's people that are just trying to get it done, and they're not totally upfront with how they do things, and they try to paint what they're doing as something that isn't, right? We get so many people that go like, oh, we do the same thing that Little Belt does, we're the same as them, and it's not even close. It's not even the same sport. My resistance to all of that is I am obsessed with the quality of the product that we're putting out. I'm obsessed with the care, and our team is too. The care and the quality of care that those livestock get from start to finish. All the people who work for us go through low stress livestock handling, have certifications in ultimately what comes down, in my opinion, to just the quality assurance and the care of the cattle that we own and run. We get people all the time that are like, oh, I want to come out and help at the ranch, which is great. And I'm like, hey, do you have any livestock experience? They're like, no. I'm like, do you have this certification? They're like, certification? What are you talking about? I just want to come and like, it looks fun riding a horse around cows. And I'm like, no, believe it or not, like all the guys who work for us have different certifications in different things. Like these are pros. These are people that have a super high proficiency in the thing that they're doing. And the thing that they do is cowboying and cattle work, and watching those pros in those teams, just like watching small military units as they do their thing. I mean, it's amazing to just sit back and watch. But the level of skill that it takes for them to do what they do is something that impresses me still to this day, and something I still strive to get better at. But at the end of the day, and sorry for the long answer, I want the quality of Little Belt premium beef to be something that when people get it, they're like, oh yeah, this is a next level beef experience. And that's what keeps me, from kind of rushing in to the building, right? And the other thing too is the money it takes to kind of rush in, we always don't have access to. So, but I think more importantly than money is the quality of the product that we're producing is the thing that from our team all the way through that entire process is the thing that they focus the most on.
Back to the what, right? The
Yep.
What you and your team are doing, and the what that makes it to the plate. I love it. I think it's probably a good place to start to wrap things up here. So where can folks find you? You're D2C, and you're also local. And this is obviously not a regional or a local podcast, but where can folks find you? Where can folks find the beef? Where can folks find the product? Where can folks get involved and help as customers, not as ranch hands?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to hit on that, it's interesting. So we actually do a bunch of stuff, especially with veterans. We work with veteran nonprofits. We work with Montana State University. We work with, we've hosted interns. We've tried to help other people, and right now our focus is on veterans. Obviously, that's the space we come out to. Our company is committed to hiring veterans. In our mission statement, we've got a certain percentage of our company that we will strive to be veterans. We've helped people get their start in ag. So we're all about helping extend the table versus, building the fences higher, if you will. But where you can find us, littlebeltcattleco.com is our primary website. You can get a lot more information about us and our business and, kind of everything we do. The one thing we didn't really touch on, which I'll just hit on quickly. I mean, we run a full regenerative grazing practices at the ranch. And so our cattle, right up until they go to the feed yard to be finished, which again would be a whole nother podcast to talk about the differences there. And I'm sorry we didn't get into that. But our cattle are regeneratively raised on grass. So they're a grass-fed, grain-finished product that we think we really like the way that product finishes ourselves. And that's why we focus on that, especially for our restaurant partners, et cetera. So littlebeltcattleco.com. You can find us at Instagram at littlebeltcattleco. And, we use our Instagram, try to give people like a good look at what does it take to, to put beef on the shelf and on your plate. You can order beef on there. We work with two different partners online that do all of our like distribution and fulfillment. One of those is a veteran coalition through Casey Cattle Company, where they're Angus beef supplier. They do a Wagyu program, and all of the Angus comes from our ranch to them. So you can go to their website and you can order on that. We also work with another distributor called Crowd Cow, which is basically distribution and fulfillment for regional places to get their product out nationwide. And there's some other great ones out there too that we currently don't work with, only because of the kind of the volume we're at and what we really need on our end. But those are the best places to find us. We hugely appreciate everybody's support. We love hearing from people. We love getting people's questions. We love talking about this, obviously. And we greatly appreciate, things like this where we can come on and talk about it and just give people a deeper look into what does it take to produce, beef? What does it take to get into different things? And I tell people this all the time. I mean, the only thing that we kind of had going into this was a desire to want to be good. And we wanted to be accepted by our peers. We wanted, people to look at our outfit and say, man, those for guys that are just coming into it, they're doing a pretty good job. And we've worked really hard to build a reputation of hard work and quality and commitment. And we hope that comes through in everything that we're doing. And we hope that encourages other people to go after the things that they want to go after. And, kind of back to your point you were saying before, I mean, what we do and the time that we have to do it, if you're going to spend time away from your family and from other things, it better be doing something you really want to be doing. And you're probably the same way as me. I mean, I have friends that, don't have that anymore. And a lot of the stuff that I do, I think about, the fact that, and it's a motivating factor for me in a positive way to spend the time that we have here doing things that are valuable and are important and that you're proud of. And that's available to everybody. You just have to have the courage to go after whatever that is for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's a good word. Quickly, what's your philosophy? And it probably is a longer podcast, but just to end it on this, and we could probably have another conversation, but grass-fed versus grain-fed, grass-fed, grain-finished gets talked about a lot. What's your quick breakdown of why you do it the way that you do it and what consumers should be looking for versus what they shouldn't be looking for?
Yeah, you bet. So we should probably, if people like this, we can do a whole nother one on just cattle stuff. These can go long. And so I'll just say this, there's a lot of similarities and there's some slight differences. So your grass-fed, grass-finished typically is going to be, it's going to be a less marbled product. it has some benefits in health. I think they've hit on that very much on the marketing side of that. Um, from everything I've read, it's comparable, and I would encourage you to do research on both. Grass-fed grain finished is when cattle go typically into a feed yard or get access to, it's not strictly a grain-based diet. It's a combination of, forage and different grains. But what that grain does, people literally have doctorates in this stuff. What is happening is you're going to see a very visually different product. A grass-fed grain finished product is going to have white fat, which we're pretty used to seeing, where your grass-fed grass finish is going to have more of a yellowish, kind of orangish, and the flavor profile is going to be very different. Not saying not all grass-fed grass finished can't get there, but typically those carcasses are not going to grade. There's very, very few that are going to grade above select. And a lot of that has to come down to the time that to be graded USDA, it's under 30 months. And typically those grass-fed cattle need way longer to grow to the size that they need to be at. And so I would encourage everybody to do the research on their own. There's so much marketing and a lot of it's gimmicks that's put out there. Oh, this product's better for you, blah, blah, blah. Maybe on some areas, but then there's benefits to grain finished beef as well. There's environmental benefits that apply to both. I think it's a big topic. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't eat fake meat. It's terrible for you. The marketing that goes into that is we could have a whole conversation on that. But if you're into grain, like a grass-fed, grass-finished product, awesome. There's amazing producers out there that are doing it in putting out fantastic product. If you're into grass-fed, grain-finished, and you like that higher marbled choice prime grade stuff, then awesome. Like it's more of a consumer choice, and one is not better than the other. One is not doing something that's having this massive impact on your health or the environment better than the other. It's very, very comparable. It's more of what's the end result beef that you like on your plate. And there's people out there that can argue, oh, in this, B3 you get more, but this one B6, great. Like it's just what makes sense for you and your lifestyle and what you prefer. Our customers and the target market that we were going after, especially in the beginning, which was Montana, Bozeman, Big Sky, super high quality restaurants that they don't serve grass-fed, grass-finished, most of them, because the customer base isn't going to go in there and pay that price for a steak that doesn't have the ability to be graded choice and prime.
Fair. Yeah. At the end of the day, eat beef, right?
Yeah. Sorry, long answer, but I'm doing my best. It's a long topic.
We'll definitely have you back, and we'll get into the weeds on all that. Greg, to end each episode of the podcast, I ask an open-ended question. What's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate that we've talked about today. But Greg, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think for our community, right? I think immediately when you ask me that, it's veterans, it's transitioning veterans, it's that next step in life, right? I just encourage everybody to be honest with themselves about what they truly want to do next. Don't let other people kind of guide your next step, and realize that it is a process. It's hard. It gets better the further you go. It gets tighter as you start, but you got to drop the blanket bombs first, and you got to soften the target before you go in, right? And give yourself a little bit of grace that you're not going to have it all figured out, and that's okay. And know that you've got a community of people that you can count on and care about you and care about your success, and lean on them. And when it gets hard, realize, anybody who's done it before you knows where you're coming from. And you got a lot of people rooting for you, and it's a challenge, and it's another challenge. But as you work through that challenge, the opportunity to come out doing something that you're really proud of and that has, equal value and benefit is there. You just got to go through the process.
It's great advice. Couldn't agree more. Greg, appreciate your time. Appreciate your energy. Appreciate your beef. And we'll do this again soon.
Really appreciate it. Yeah. If people have questions, hit us up on Instagram, shoot us an email, and then maybe we do this again. We'll answer some fan/customer questions that they want to talk about more because, there's just a lot to it. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate
Awesome.
you.
Peace.